Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Hidden Treasures from the Hopkinton Historical Society. I'm really pleased to have John Palmer, the president of the Historical Society, with me here today, who brought an amazing story. You're not even going to believe it. John, thanks so much for being here.
That's my pleasure, and I'm looking forward to this story.
Now, before you even get into it, right? Because I read the book. I read the book that you wrote from it. I'm interested in how did you come across this story and describe what that was like?
So, my job at the Historical Society, I was a volunteer. My job now is president, but I was a volunteer. I would spend that every Monday afternoon, and we were open Thursday evenings then. I would spend in the building, helping people out, doing whatever jobs they gave me to do. And one day had nothing to do. When I don't have anything to do, I usually look through the files, looking at the collections. What does the Historical Society have for files? And we have a lateral file drawer, and I pulled it out, and there was a clipping this thick of photographs of newspaper articles. And it says Miss Duffey on the outside. So I said, this is interesting. But I never heard of Miss Duffey. So I went and took the first newspaper article, and I read it, and I said, wow, this is kind of interesting. Then I took the second one and read it, and I said, this is really interesting. I want to do something with this. And then I kept going, and I was hooked, almost from the beginning, hooked. And at some point, I said, well, this would make a great story to tell. And I have all these newspaper articles. The whole story is in newspapers. Mm-hmm. We have the original newspapers there. Somebody had donated them, but it's much easier to handle a photocopy of it. And I said, I got the idea, this might be a good book. Mm-hmm. So I started working on the book, and it ended up like this. We've sold quite a few copies. It's been quite popular. There was a lot of Hopkintonians there's a lot of older Hopkintonians that know Miss Duffey. She was around for a long time, and many of them said they always knew there was something in her background, but they never knew exactly what it was, and it was this story. Mm-hmm. So apparently she didn't, I don't know, maybe it got forgotten. But
I don't know.
Yeah.
Just to preface it, I just want to say this is kind of what I would call a rollicking ride of a story. It's amazing. Yeah. It is just amazing. Yeah. And how do you want to encapsulate it for our audience? Do you want to give them an overview, or how do you want to present it?
Well, I thought I would present it the way I started reading it in the newspaper, which was like the first article about how it all unfolded, mm-hmm. And then we can take it from there. But by way of background, this is a story about a school teacher and her issues with the school department, but it's more than that. It's a story about Hopkinton politics. This is 100 years ago. This happened in 1919, 1920, 100 years ago. But it sounds like the politics today. We had two boards that were kind of mixing throughout the story. One was the Board of Selectmen. These were boards of three people at that time. It was chairman of the Board of Selectmen, a very powerful person. His name was Roach. And have I got that right?
Was it Carr?
Yes, his name was Edward Carr.
Yeah.
I have to keep this on a piece of paper for myself.
A lot of names.
A lot of names, and that's why I wanted to give this little bit of background. Edward Carr was an autocratic chairperson of the Board of Selectmen. And then we had an autocratic chairperson of the school committee. His name was Edward Roach. And these two people, I think they ran the town, and they worked together. And so politics goes through this. But remember Roach and Carr, those are key people in this. And we have Miss Duffey on one side, and we have the politicians on the other side. And there's a lot of back and forth.
And not only that, also the entire townspeople when they have the special town meeting.
We have the townspeople. Everybody didn't. Well, I want to tell you about Mr. Roach, anyways. But the townspeople did not like Carr or Roach. So we have the townspeople who are big supporters of Miss Duffey, and we had the two powerful politicians on the other side, running the town.
Yeah.
And making decisions.
Right. So there they are.
Yeah.
She is a school teacher at Hopkinton High School.
Hopkinton High School, and this was at 85 Main Street.
Yeah, right next door.
Right next door.
Okay.
And so there's a background here. Mr. Roach, the chairman of the school committee, we're in World War I now. The World War wasn't one then. It was the World War. And Mr. Roach he avoided the draft. He claimed that he was ill and he couldn't serve. And he got criticized for that, heavily criticized for it. The superintendent of schools laid into him. Miss Duffey laid into him, and a lot of townspeople laid into him for avoiding the draft for the war. And so, of course, he didn't like that, and he fought back. And he took his revenge out several ways. One is on the superintendent of schools, and at that time it was the superintendent of both the Hopkinton and Ashland schools. We shared his salary. He prohibited him from attending any school committee meetings. He was persona non gratis. Then the second thing he did is he worked up this scheme to get rid of Miss Duffey. She was a thorn in his side. So he worked up this scheme to fire her. And that's where the whole thing starts to get involved. So it was a Saturday night at the high school on Main Street. There was a special meeting of the school committee. The only item on the agenda was the position of Miss Duffey. And at that time, just as another background, we had Roach on the school committee and Carr on the Board of Selectmen. We had, on both boards, there was a resignation by a member. So both boards were short a person. Roach and Carr got together and appointed a friend of Roach's onto the school committee. So Roach, he controlled the school committee because he was there, and then he had his buddy as a member. So when it came time to vote against retaining Miss Duffey, it was a 2-to-1 vote against her.
Right.
And the school, and this meeting of the school committee was well known by the public. It was advertised. I think the newspaper said there was 500 people showed up. They couldn't get in because there was too many. So a few selected people were allowed into the meeting room. Miss Duffey was not allowed in, and they didn't take long to vote 2-to-1 to fire her.
And why? What were the charges?
So the charges, there's one word that describes them. It's called ridiculous.
Yes.
But there were 3 charges. One was that she waved her hand at the conductor of a passing trolley car. In those days, there was a trolley line that went right down Main Street. And supposedly, the trolley conductor was a boyfriend. I don't know if that's for sure or not. Sometimes you read and it'll say it, and sometimes it's not. But anyway, she waved her hand at the passing trolley car conductor. The trolley went by there once an hour.
And by the way, right, it wasn't just that she waved behind her back.
She waved behind, yes, she actually waved behind, yeah, because she would be standing facing the class with the big windows to her back.
Yeah.
And she would wave at him behind her back. That was one story. The second one really grabs me. The second reason they gave was she insulted one of the mothers of, or she allegedly insulted one of the mothers of the students. There was a classroom exercise where the students were asked to write a letter to a railroad company requesting a reservation of a Pullman berth for their mother. And this boy, his name was Madigan, wrote a letter to the railroad company requesting a berth for his mother on the train. But Miss Duffey says, "Oh, you made a mistake. You didn't tell the railroad company whether the berth should be an upper or lower berth." So in that time, there was two levels. There was like a sleeping car, and you could be upstairs or downstairs. And then she said, "Surely your mother would want a lower. She would not want to climb upstairs." And anyways, that went home to Mrs. Madigan, who took it as an insult. So Mrs. Madigan was very mad at her for this. And then the third reason is legitimate. Miss Duffey supported the superintendent of schools in the charge against Mr. Roach for avoiding the draft, and he took his revenge out that way. So that was the three charges.
Yep.
She was fired. Word got out almost immediately, and the big crowd was outside, and they started rioting. We had to get 3 sheriffs came in from Framingham to help the local police quell the riot. One of the mothers got on the running board. I don't know if you know what running boards are, but the cars used to have these running boards at those times.
It was like a step underneath the door.
Step beside the door.
Yeah.
And she jumped up the running board, shook Mr. Roach, and called him, you bum, you slacker. And that was known at the time. People that avoided the draft in the World War were called slackers.
Okay.
And he got called a slacker by this Mrs. Pond. Mrs. Pond was upset because, and I should have said this by way of background, but in June 1919, when the previous year's graduates, they didn't have graduation ceremonies. The school committee failed to provide graduation ceremonies. They didn't get their diplomas. There was no ceremonies and no diplomas, and a lot of parents were upset with the school committee. They didn't graduate. Anyways, Mrs. Pond was one of the ones that was very upset. So anyways, that.
All right, so Mrs. Duffey wasn't taking this lying down.
No, Mrs. Duffey.
Miss Duffey, I'm sorry.
Miss Duffey was, didn't take it lying down. She went and had her attorney bring an action against the school committee to the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court, the highest court in Massachusetts. It's called a writ of mandamus. I'm an attorney, so I know this term, mandamus, but it's a request of the court to order a particular action. And her action, she wanted the court to order her to be reinstated. That was one thing that happened. The second thing that happened was there were several petitions made to the Board of Selectmen and to the school board, petitions to appoint, to have a special meeting.
Special town meeting?
A special town meeting. And these petitions, they didn't go anyplace because we had on the school, on the Board of Selectmen, there was 2 members. There was Mr. Carr was one, and Mr. Danahy, the barber, T.J. Danahy was the other member of the Board of Selectmen, and they couldn't agree. It was 1-to-1.
Yeah.
It was tied. There was no.
So I believe Mr. Danahy made a motion for a special town meeting, and Mr. Carr said there's no second, so it doesn't go anywhere.
Yeah, there's no second. That's why they can't, when there's 2 people and they're on opposite sides, everything's frozen. And this is what was going on in Hopkinton 100 years ago, and it's probably happened many times since. I don't know.
Yeah. So there were several trips to Framingham to the court.
So one of the other major incidents was that right after the riot, Mr. Roach took out a warrant for the arrest of 7 residents on various charges, but assaulting a public official, assault and battery, causing a riot, and went to district court in Framingham. 1,000 people from the town of Hopkinton went. They had to order special extra trolley cars to get the people to Framingham.
Which, by the way, 1,000 people out of what? I think there were 2,500
it
people.
was probably 2,500 people. I mean, this was a big deal. Everybody in town was well into this story, and the one of the people, I want to mention this, one of the people that was brought to court was a man by the name of Louis Drawbridge. Louis Drawbridge ends up getting on the school committee, but he was the one that donated to the Historical Society a full collection of the original newspaper clippings. He had clipped them all out. And we have his newspaper clippings, and I think the photos that were made from that. But
wow.
I remember that well because
that's amazing to think of. If that one man did not do that, the story could have been lost.
So we're back in the days. There was radio probably, but we're back in the days when newspapers were king, and everybody waited for the newspapers to arrive to read the stories.
Yeah.
And this story caught the whole state, the attention of the whole state. Boston Globe, Boston Herald, Record American, Framingham News, every day they had stories on it. The school war.
Right.
They call it the school war.
Right.
The Hopkinton school war.
All right, so now we have all this. Miss Duffey is asking for a writ of mandamus. We have the 7 people who are arrested on charges of assault and various things like that. We have people who are circulating petitions for a special town meeting, and they want that special town meeting to reinstate Miss Duffey?
They want a special town meeting so they can vote to elect a third person to the boards. Both boards, the select board and the school committee board, they want to elect a third person. And they had both parties, the Republicans and the Democrats, had a caucus and came up with their person. It happened to be the same person. They call this a coalition ticket. There was a coalition ticket where it was unanimous who the person was going to be. So it seemed like all you needed to do was get the meeting. You're going to get your person elected. He was going to be against the incumbent, and things will settle out.
Which I guess is why Mr. Carr really wasn't into this meeting.
No, he was not into the meeting a lot. So the meeting was at the town hall. Town hall was, at that time, was about where it is today. It was a different building, but it's about where it is today. And the meeting was scheduled for a particular time and day, and the people, say it was 1,000, hundreds and hundreds of people showed up for the meeting, by the way. And it was a snowstorm. It was a very bad January day. But they showed up. The door was locked.
The town hall.
The town hall. Mr. Carr was behind the door saying, "You can't come in, it's locked." And he also had posted on the town bulletin board, which was on the outside of the door, "No trespassing." Now these are the townspeople. This is the town hall that is the property of the people.
Yeah.
But anyways, I couldn't get in. And then he was saying, they were saying, "Well, we're having a meeting today." And he says, "Well, you can't. You're not getting in. You're not meeting in here. And if your meeting says you're going to be meeting at the town hall, then since you're not going to be meeting there, there's no legal meeting." So
because they moved to the VA.
So what happened was the town clerk, who must have been a very smart person, he had taken all of the voting apparatus. These are the ballot, whatever the apparatus is, but it's where you vote.
For counting votes.
Where you count the votes. He had taken those home, and he brought those with him. And he was outside, and he read from the front steps of the town hall the call of the meeting. And he said, "We're going to have the meeting next door at Forrester's Hall." It was right next door. I think where it's pretty much where
Is it Bill's Pizza? That's
no, it's one more side. It was
the church.
Yeah, between the church and between the church and there's a function hall there.
Oh, the VFW.
Yeah, VFW.
Okay.
And Forrester's Hall and the VFW were one and the same.
Okay.
And he had also called, the town clerk had also called the Secretary of State in Massachusetts and got permission to move the meeting from the town hall to the Forrester's Hall. So they had their meeting. The vote was overwhelming. Miss Duffey was the candidates that were put up won, of course, and the school committee immediately reorganized after that. Mr. Drawbridge was one of the candidates, so he was now on it, and Mr. Roach is still on it, and the third person on the school committee was Edward Condon, and it was always Roach was one. Roach was a support. Roach wanted to run the school committee. Condon was opposed to Roach, but they were 1-1. Mr. Drawbridge is now the third member, so now it's 2-1 against Roach. On the reorganization meeting, Roach didn't even show up at the meeting, but they reappointed Miss Duffey as a teacher. They welcomed back the superintendent of schools, and they conducted a lot of school business, and things started calming down.
I thought an interesting point was there was an article in the newspaper saying that Mr. Carr was wrong when he was barring the door to town hall, like you had mentioned. And he was a servant of the people, and that was the people's place. And Mr. Carr, actually, his words are in here too, and his response to that, which I thought was very interesting too. So the next thing that I was thinking is you talked about these 7 people who were arrested on these charges.
So this went on. There was at least 2 or 3 hearings. And finally, on the last day of the hearings, all 7 were found not guilty by Judge Adams, who was the trial officer and the hearing officer, and they were released. And so that was good news. That was a big day. It was a late January day. We had all 7 released. We had the special town meeting was successful. Miss Duffey was rehired, and there was a complete change around of the makeup of the town the school committee and the board of selectmen.
So tell me about that one. What happened to Mr. Carr?
So Mr. Carr was still on the school. He was elected. He was still on the school committee.
The school committee.
The board of selectmen.
Yep.
But he did not run. So then we have the annual town meeting, and which is with the annual election every spring. He did not run for office.
Okay.
So he just kind of faded away. But he didn't fade away easily, because he went on the when the town meeting got when the special town meeting got moved to Foresters Hall, he went and filed an action with the Massachusetts Superior Court saying that was illegal. And the court did not side with him. They said, no, it's okay.
Right.
I do want to say one last thing.
Yeah.
Miss Duffey was a school teacher here in Hopkinton until 1954.
Wow.
So she spent her whole career here. She was a principal. She was a chairperson of the Women's Club. She was a very important person in our town.
Yeah.
And
that's amazing.
Very few people know about her troubles in 1919.
Right. That's one thing, honestly. There were not a lot of her words in here. You know, there were a lot of quotes from Mr. Carr, Mr. Roach, and other people saying things in here and there. She went to court, but there's not a lot of her coming out and saying these charges are scandalous or these people are acting. You know what I mean? She didn't have a lot of words.
No. So since this was written from the newspaper articles, I have to believe that there isn't a lot of her quotes in the newspaper articles.
Right, right.
The scandalous ones, the scandalous ones were obviously in the newspaper article, and there was also if you read the whole book, there are a number of humorous episodes that readers had written into the newspaper about what was going on, the school wars, and some of them.
The one that really caught my eye was the person who was in that school building, and he polished his badge.
Oh yes,
remember that?
Yeah. So that was the appointed member of the school committee that Mr. Roach got appointed. He happened to be a town constable, and he was actually in a closet hiding when this was going on, and he decided he was coming out. So he put his badge on and he struts out. But anyways, yeah.
At times, it's a great read. Yeah. It's fantastic. And to hear some of these names that we know, like Pond, Mrs. Pond, it's really, really something. Yeah. Well, hey, thank you so much.
I appreciate
for finding this and putting it out there. And I really hope that everybody who has heard the story here will also take the step to read the original story, which you can access at the Historical Society.
Yeah, we have these at the Historical Society, and would love to provide a copy.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you so much. I hope to see you next time for another Hidden Treasures.
Okay. Thank you very much.
All right.
Be glad to.
And thank you for joining us. Look forward to seeing you next time as well. Take care.